My name is Margie O'Driscoll, and I'm the competition advisor for the Architecture at Zero competition. Today, we're going to be doing a short interview with our jury chair for the competition, Allison Williams. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the competition. The competition is managed by the American Institute of Architects, California, and is supported by 4 California utilities: Southern California Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric, SoCal Gas, and San Diego Gas and Electric. The competition looks at decarbonization, equity, and resilience. And our competition site is a real site in Visalia, California, which is the heart of Central Valley, one of the richest agrarian places in the world. And the competition itself is to build affordable housing for farm workers, people that work in the fields. So we're very excited that you're going to join us in this conversation with Allison Williams. She has served as the jury chair for many years, not that many years. She's not that old, for goodness sake. And but she does have over 40 years of experience in large-scale civic and cultural work with Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, Perkins+Will and AECOM. And she's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. She's currently a design advisor to the Oakland A's and serves as a design advisor to other illustrious projects here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And she joins me today from her home in San Francisco, California. Allison, so great to have you.
Hi, Margie. It's great to do it again with you.
That's great. Well, so you've done this competition in past years. So I guess my first question to you is, what makes this competition special?
Well, this competition is special not only because it's an open competition, but entries from, the youngest, most raw, imaginative and creative minds come together with the same programmatic and deadlines and technical requirements as some of the most prestigious and well-established firms around the world to address not only carefully chosen design problems, but an overarching responsibility that we have as designers designers of the environment, because it's not just about designing a building, it's about designing an environment that's going to use nature, that's going to be sustainable and resilient. So it's not just about making a pretty building, but it is about actually making beauty of this performance responsibility that buildings, anything that we build on the land now have. And the surprising thing that happens at the end of the jurying process, where sometimes, I think now we probably separate the students from the professionals, but I think it's really enlightening to see that some of the student work is incredibly sophisticated. And the professional work, I think, can be the foundation for how a firm, whether they win or lose, how they take the experience of really calibrating a building into their practices and elevate the dialogue within their firms.
So as Allison noted, we have a real site in Visalia, California with a real client, a nonprofit organization called Self-Help Enterprises, an extremely well-respected organization in the Central Valley. So this competition gives real-world constraints, which are actually quite powerful, not just for professionals, but also for students to encounter a competition which deals with some of the real-world issues that you might have once you get out into serving in the profession.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you have any recommendations to student or professional teams about how to begin to think about this competition?
Yeah. I think the first thing to think about is we would highly recommend that you don't do it by yourself. The reality of really thinking through a problem is cross-disciplinary, it's interdisciplinary, and it's intradisciplinary, meaning that it's not only working with other professionals, a structural engineer or a mechanical engineer who could really engage, or a landscape architect who could really engage all the other factors that are part of designing within an environment. But also, economically and socially, these become elements that are now layered into our thinking when we talk about resiliency, when we talk about equity. And so I always think, even within a firm, that it's a good idea to not only use the resources within the firm, but reach outside of the design resources, perhaps, to gain some kind of adjacent way of analyzing the problem from the very beginning. It's not a layer that comes after you've got a design approach. It may, in fact, influence how you approach the project altogether. I think as individuals going after, rather than with a firm, if you're going to make a collection of individuals going after it together, which I just a few minutes ago said it was a good idea to work with other people, maybe the majority of them are of similar design backgrounds. Have a landscape architect on your team really do that. I would say minimally do that, because in order to really layer the site, potential for making a building something that's going to be fed by nature, using plant life and geolocating the project properly, and thinking about shade and shadow and solar, all the energy and water things are really the language of the landscape architecture. And having a seamless attitude about that would be a really good advantage to how you start to think about the problem. In all the years that I've done this, I have to admit, and it won't take Margie by surprise, but I'm not all that good at doing calculations. I have a much more intuitive way of approaching what is kind of passive intelligence in how one positions the building on the site. But have people on your team who really do sharpen their pencils and understand the calculations, and have them there early enough that you haven't completed the design, thinking that you just have to submit it to analysis. You should do a little brief kind of early test analysis just to see if you're on the right track and help you tune the project along the way. So it's really about thinking with all parts of your brain, and that your team being made up of a collection of committed people, but with slightly different, minimally overlapping expertise.
That's great. I think I also just wanted to mention, you reminded me, Allison, that we've had high schoolers actually compete successfully in this competition.
Yeah.
So we're throwing down the gauntlet to everybody entering the competition. If high schoolers can wow this very prestigious jury, we know that college students can, as well as professionals.
Absolutely.
And for college students in particular, there is a huge amount of resources, both videos, classes, and readings that you can take, these resources are all on the website. So the idea was, when we created this competition, is we wanted to be sure that design teams at whatever level they were entering the competition at would have all the resources they need in one place to complete the competition. So it's rare that you have a competition that actually provides that kind of support and direction. And I think it's a real commitment by the utilities in California to make sure that people learn along the way and don't just guess, as Allison was talking about, but actually build teams and dig deeply into the understanding. Because, in our belief, the only way that we are going to be able to respond holistically to climate change and the world that's changing around us, and we see it so acutely here in California, is by having robust educational tools and using science and design to help us resolve some of these ongoing issues, which are becoming only more pressing over time.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, the competition had a focus of zero net energy, and now it's moved towards decarbonization. And I just wondered if you could talk about the role of decarbonization and what that means to you as a preeminent designer here in the United States.
Well, I think in the years where, very bravely this competition was set up to discuss net zero energy, at first it seemed like you really had to work hard. And over the years, it's not that you don't have to work hard, you just have to work really smart from the first moment, as we were just saying, in terms of not making a building have to work overtime to undo something that it's doing, but rather to make sure that the building isn't doing certain things to produce or use energy in a way that then one has to compensate for through other measures to kind of balance out at zero. So I think what's really wonderful about this next era of the competition is we've upped the ante with the same now. Not that net zero energy was easy, but we're all becoming so much more intelligent that we take that for granted, that we're responsible on the energy platform. Carbon is a little bit different, but in some ways we're entering into it, realizing that what we're trying to do is not only balance the output of gases that we then have to correct for so that we're neutral. We're really trying just not to use or to produce. And I think that it trickles down into the processes for manufacturing, for building, for just everyday life in your house. And so I believe that in many ways it is carbon neutral is critical to get to 2030 and 2050. But in many ways, what we've done with this, what Margie and her colleagues have done with creating this next round is to up the ante, because we can see what's going on relative to gases that are being produced. And I think that if we couldn't see the evidence before, we can see it now. So it's a now kind of event that we have to start using less. And for me, it's less about balancing. It's more about just not producing something that you therefore don't have to balance.
That's a really good point. The competition also this year is focusing on equity. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that. It's been obviously a topic of great conversation in the United States and certainly here in the Bay Area over the last couple of years. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about equity, especially for people who might not be from the Bay Area, who might be sort of encountering this idea for the first time.
Equity is, as you said, it's kind of front of mind, or hopefully is becoming front of mind, and at the same time is very difficult to define. I believe that it is both so very straightforward that once you take a stab at understanding what it means, it just seems, well, of course, everyone should have access to housing. Of course, nobody should be living on a toxic field. Of course, everyone should have privacy and access to clean water. And I mean, it's almost an of course kind of aha moment. But when you look around and you see the kind of disparate decisions that have been made over time that marginalize underrepresented communities, individuals, it isn't an of course thing. It is definitely something that one has to ask those questions the very first day you begin a project as a designer in the environment. And the social component is a cultural component. Understand who you're designing for. The social aspect of tradition and meaning in certain communities is critically important to understand. So in the case of this year's program, I think it is really important to take a deep dive and understand for whom you're designing the building. And of course, where you're designing it, but for whom you're designing it. And that buildings will have a life beyond the first user. That's the other thing, the durability, the permanence, that sense that you're designing something that can not only use its surroundings, but it can not be so specific that it cannot be used for broad kind of audience, but it will stand the test of time. So it will be durable. And in 5 years or 10 years, it will be able to be adjusted or manipulated or renovated in a way that its life is long. It's not a temporary, at least I'll say this, and you tell me if I'm wrong, Margie, but I think it's a building that wants to have a long life, though there's a lot of discussion about temporary things that are intended to be temporary. And in many ways, that in and of itself is a perspective on resilience. So I'm really anxious. The reason I love doing this is because I walk away thinking about things differently than I might have started. And every project is informed a little bit by the other aspects of your life and your professional kind of meanderings. And so this is one of my professional meanderings, and I really look forward to getting the stimulus and more that the jury has always been privileged to have.
We love going on this meander with you, I have to say. Let me just also add that the competition audience, or the people that will be the beneficiaries of the ideas that come from this project, are farm workers, who are notoriously an underpaid group of people who often live in what we call here in the Bay Area and in California, substandard housing. So in other words, housing that might have problems with mold, overcrowding, not great ventilation. So the idea of building dignified homes for people and their families is actually something that very much meets our desire to create a more equitable world. So that's part of the way that we think about this. I think that the question of equity is also a global one. You know, farm workers around the world are not all treated with as much respect as other long-term residents of a particular community. So I'm happy to say that this competition is really trying to create a more equitable world for all. And that's part of our overall objective. The other aspect of the competition is to consider what we call resilience. Now, resilience has been described by the Rockefeller Foundation as the ability of communities to bounce back after a stressor. And a stressor could be anything from an earthquake to a heat event, or in the case of California, we had extreme weather conditions during the summer of 2020. We had wildfires and extreme heat, and both of those are forecast as being potential climatic issues in 2021. And so I just wanted to give you, Allison, a chance to talk about resilience from a design perspective and any advice you might have for teams about how to consider resilience.
Yes, I mean, I think it's most immediately clear that designing single-use buildings is perhaps a thing of the past. And the idea of designing buildings with an understanding that there will be some transformation of how, what our needs are, whether it's housing or whether it's multi-use facilities, cultural facilities, parking garage, you know, you name it. There is an kind of immediate need to think about the fact that not only will the user change, but the way in which the need for space will change. And so that's not a suggestion that we produce kind of mute or neutered buildings that don't have some sense of expression of quality and sectional value, and the way that buildings use sunshine, not just for solar gain, but for the way that light moves through a space. You know, the idea of using that as kind of a timelessness, a simple shell that is productive and uses the sun, that could in the future become not just a house, but it could in fact become a classroom or something. This idea that buildings need to be built with more than adequate kind of spatial definition. So one would maybe make partitions movable or dismountable without altering the overall structure of a house. The idea that the basic frame of a house can be very robust, such that things can be added and subtracted to change its use. Certainly there are core elements, hardwired, plumbing facilities, access to water, that if they're properly located, they can create a more flexible kind of living space and be flexible for future use.
That's great. I don't really have any more questions. Is there anything that you'd like to add? Any advice for teams thinking about entering the competition?
No, I just, every year when we get to this point, Margie, I think, I should enter this.
You're not allowed.
I'm feeling that now. No, I wish everybody who decides to take the plunge, I wish you good luck, and also to enjoy it, and think about how you can clearly present your work in a way that lets us know how you got from the moment that you started to the package that you submit. And I'll take this moment just to say, we love hand sketches. We love beautiful, kind of first idea, throwing spit at the wall kinds of sketches that are part of the process. Though those by themselves are generally not adequate to get through the first round, they are very pleasant and pleasurable to see in the margins as what could maybe have been the genesis of where you and your team end up in the final hurrah. But also we like the little window into the process. It's all part of the competition format, and it's great to be able to see how people came to the conclusions that they did.
Thank you. With that, we're going to conclude this interview. Allison, thank you so much. And to the teams entering, please enter. We know this is not the easiest competition for you to enter, but we guarantee it's the one you're going to learn the most from and help us solve the challenges of the climate for the rest of us throughout the world. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.